the system that's set up for us now? Why do you think that happens?
Because you don't own and control the land, the tools, the resources, and everything else. When land was given out in America during the slavery period, that immigration was an open policy for everybody around the world to come to this country and get resources, except black folk. And during that period, first thing that George Washington said is that the wealth of this nation would be in the land. And he said, I want 100,000 acres of free land. And Thomas Jefferson said, I want 100,000 acres of free land. And then after he heard that, Patrick Henry that says, give me life or give me death, he then said, I want 65,000 acres of free land. And then so consequently during the period of slavery, during from point 1 up to 1862, this country gave away 2 billion, BILLION, okay, acres of free land, but it all went to whites, not to blacks. And see, and guess what? In all the land, and then the wealth of the nation was in that land, in gas, in oil, in timber, in iron, and coal, and minerals, and all that kind of stuff. Black folk couldn't get any land because the Dred Scott decision of 1857 says you have no rights to get any land. And so the liberal white congressman in the Republican Party, called the Radical Republican, says we're going to correct that by creating a second constitution. And that's to mean from 13 up to 15 will be a second constitution. This constitution, just like the first constitution from 1 through 12 amendments were strictly for whites, we're going to create another constitution. And following the Civil War, it's going to pick up 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and the Civil Rights laws. And those 3 things or 4 things will be strictly for black people.
They don't got no land in there, though.
But
no land in neither one of them amendments.
Some of your strongest senators stood up on the floor of the House of Representatives and the Senate says this: there's only 2 things that black folk can be in this country. You're either going to be slaves or you're going to be free. But to be free, minimally, you must have 40 acres, a mule, and $100.
Man, the only person that is operating on that is Spike Lee. He's the only one that got 40.
Shalom. Now you see why things are the way they are today. Nothing is by coincidence. This has been all orchestrated from on top. The Edomite, power structure. And this is why you suffer today. Ultimately, it goes into the spiritual disobedience from the curses. It had to manifest in the physical. So this is how it manifested. And the so-called white man was the facilitator of this. He's still doing it today. That's why you go to all these real estate developments all over the world. The predominant people that control everything is so-called white people. So I'm going to get into this chat GPT. Let's go elaborate more on this. And you're really in a literal hell. I was thinking about, how we come into the end of this captivity, and it's been very bitter. Very bitter. And some things, sometimes we got heaviness on our spirit because we know more than the average person do. Brothers sometimes go into this vast history and it mourns you. It puts you in a state of depression, almost, right? And we have to make sense out of things that don't make sense. And then you have these devils that tell you to pull your own self up by your bootstraps. You had this latest devil who was unalive, Charlie Kirk, that refused to acknowledge this history. I'm going to go into some more of it. So prior to us waking up, we didn't know why things were the way they were. That's why you go into these cities, these so-called affluent neighborhoods, you see these sprawling mansions. And the so-called white man stole everything that you see. And he repackages it as the one as he did it the right way. Matter of fact, let me get into this information here. Give me 1 second. Okay, give me 1 second, Salakia. Okay.
So, all right. I'll give you a detailed, structured breakdown. I'll lay it out in sections: land, government policy, systemic disadvantage, and covert conspiratorial actions. so you can see how each part fits together historically and in modern context. 1. Land ownership and the head start. Land is the foundation of wealth in America. It's not just property, it's power, voting rights.
All right, let me break this down to you. Land is the origin of anything that's dealing in this physical realm. You need land. And they knew what they was doing. You know what I'm saying? When these the devil. This is the devil right here. When they deprive you of land, you can no way ever build any kind of wealth or independence. That means you're going to be relying on a system, right, to take care of you. And somebody might say, well, I go to work. That's what I'm talking about. The whole ideal of you going to work was you working your own land, you being self-sufficient. And that's why you see how people are codependent on this system for a job, right? For groceries, for clothing, all they bare essentials, but this is a part of the curses. But let me get back into this.
Historically, collateral for loans and the ability to pass down generational wealth. Homestead 62. The U.S. government gave away roughly 270 million acres of land in the West to mostly white settlers for little or no cost. Black Americans were mostly excluded because the act coincided with the Civil War. Enslaved people were not freed until 1865, and by then, much of the prime land was already taken. In many states, even after freedom, Black people faced legal and violent barriers to claiming land.
Right. So you have some called, and you wasn't freed. You was emancipated. When you go into the word emancipated, it means transfer of property. You have to start to understand what words properly mean so you come out this ignorance. So in 1865, what they did is emancipated you from the private plantation owners into the public government, the United States government. And they would use you as property to continue to create wealth and do all these things, that you don't even have no idea that went on. Let's get more into this.
Land giveaways. After Native removal, the U.S. forcibly took over 2 billion acres of land from Native Americans via treaties, wars, and forced removals and redistributed it to white settlers and companies. Black Americans, even those who fought in wars, were rarely recipients of these land bounties. 40 acres and a mule promise, 1865. General Sherman's Field Order Number 15 set aside land in South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida for freedmen. This was reversed by President Andrew Johnson. Land already given to freedmen was seized back and returned to white planters. If that policy had held, millions of Black families would have had generational land wealth.
You see that? And again, these curses had to play out. We had to, suffer for our transgressions, against Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahweh Shah. It's things that you did that you don't remember in past lifetimes. And that, again, it goes back into the bitterness. What was that? Eat the whole row. And it was sweet at first. And then when it came down to you digesting it, it was bitter. So that's why we understand now that captivity is the most horrible thing that can happen to a person. Because you lose the ability, Jake has lost the ability to even think for themselves. They are so paralyzed. They are so ignorant. They are so dependent on the system that you can't comprehend it. People, you try to tell Jake to be self-sufficient. They don't know what that is. So we have a whole nation of people that has been culturally assimilated into this culture. That's why they do celebrate the traditions, right? Because they don't know what's going on. They don't get how vast and the system that they in. They don't really know how it got to where it's at now. Let's get more into this.
Land loss through violence. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Black communities that built land-based wealth were targeted. Examples.
Yeah, you had over 100 towns, so-called Black towns, and Hispanic, so-called. And, look what they did to our brethren, Gad and Reuben, the so-called Native Americans. Anytime that we created wealth, the so-called white man would come in and burn it down to the ground, or flood the city, or do something to sabotage it. So we was able to be self-sufficient at times, and you didn't always have this YN and the nigger woman culture that you have today, thought culture, twerk whores, you know what I'm saying, rappers. This was actually a culture created by the so-called white man and seduced and put on to the so-called blacks, Hispanic, and Native Americans.
Tulsa, Greenwood, Massacre 1921, Rosewood Massacre 1923, Elaine Massacre 1919, and dozens of smaller race massacres. Entire communities were burned, residents killed, and land stolen or sold under duress.
You hear that? So when a so-called white person tell you, like the Charlie Kirk, you know what I'm saying, we was, anytime that we tried to build wealth and try to be independent, the so-called white man got jealous, right? He wasn't having none of that. So when these devils try to say, look at your people now, look what they doing now, this is the effects of that. There's going to be after effects of everything. Let's keep going.
Matchup 2, Federal Policies and Structural Racism. Even after slavery, federal and state programs often explicitly or implicitly advantaged white Americans while excluding black Americans. The GI Bill, 1944, provided home loans, college tuition, and business loans to veterans. In practice, local administrators and banks, especially in the South, excluded black veterans from receiving these benefits. This program built the white middle class, but left most black veterans behind. FHA and redlining, 1934 onward.
Check this out.
The Federal Housing Administration subsidized suburban development, but explicitly refused to back loans in black neighborhoods. Redlined areas meant black families couldn't get mortgages or could only get predatory ones. This is a direct reason why white home ownership skyrocketed after World War II, while black home ownership lagged. Sharecropping and convict leasing. After emancipation, many freedmen became sharecroppers, essentially neo-serfs tied to white landowners through debt. The convict leasing system allowed states to arrest black men, often for trivial crimes, and lease them as unpaid labor to private.
There you go. So that was a clever way that they did slavery all over again. They would pass, they would arrest Jakes for a lot of these Jakes didn't even do nothing wrong. They were just, standing out because they had nowhere to go. And they would put them back into slavery under the disguise of breaking crimes in the so-called prison system to put them back into illegal slavery so they can, they can continue the operation of slavery. So slavery didn't end when you thought it did, and it's still going on to this very day. So the chattel slavery continued after 1865. A lot of people don't understand that. And it was done through sharecropping, and it was done through, the 13th Amendment, if I'm not mistaken. The 13th Amendment. Matter of fact, and I'm gonna have to do a part 2 on this because I still got like 3 more pages of this to go, go. Give me 1 second. What is the 13th Amendment about? Okay, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution abolished slavery and involuntary servitude in the United States, except as punishment for a crime, like loitering. I'm saying that correctly. You see this posted in a lot of stores in front of them. If you was just standing in front of a business or a store, that's breaking a law that they, loitering or loitering, something like that. I haven't went over that in a minute, but yeah, they would just make things up out of thin air, put Jake back into slavery, and you're looking at a destroyed, lost, sick, mentally ill people that are Christians and they don't know what's going on. They are completely in straight confusion. They don't know if they're coming or going. And this is why people operate on the level that they operate on today, because of all these things that were done to them that's still being done in a more sophisticated way. But I'm going to do a part 2. Hopefully this lesson was edifying. Called Halal Yahweh Bahashim Yahweh Shah Bahashim Rachak Kodash. Shalom.